In this project, I sought to create a Bonbi, or Tang Dynasty half-sleeve jacket, using all hand-sewn seams and finishes, a period fabric width, and an extant textile pattern. The Bonbi is a woman's short-sleeve jacket worn on top of the shirt and either tucked in or outside of the skirt, and functions like a vest. Prior to making this garment, the only Bonbi in my wardrobe was a prototype I made in 2015 out of 2 layers of quilting cotton. Bonbi means half-covered arm and refers to the short-sleeved jacket that was in style in the earlier half of the Tang Dynasty. Like the shirt, the jacket had a front opening that tied closed. Based on the estimated dates of the figurines and mural paintings, the Bonbi was most popular at the end of the 7th and beginning of the 8th century, though we do have some depictions of the Bonbi from the late 8th century. It is worth noting that as various Tang emperors tried to impose social order via sumptuary laws that banned the production and possession of elaborately woven or embroidered silks, we see the Bonbi in visual art depicted in plainer fabrics before disappearing entirely. I found a short-sleeved jacket from the Yuan dynasty in the Gansu Provincial Museum, which may be a descendant of the Tang dynasty's Bonbi. There are visible seams just past the sharp curve of the armpit, and the garment is lined with a center back seam. There are no ties or visible evidence of previous ties. The Bonbi may have either influenced or been influenced by clothing worn by the Mongols. An entire mode of dress called hufu was popular during the Tang dynasty to the degree that there are an ample number of tomb figurines and paintings of women wearing such garments, called foreign clothing. There are 3 garments from Inner Mongolia that are similar to the Bonbi. Unlike Mongol garments that feature a crossed collar design, these jackets have a parallel collar and either visible or the suggestion of previous ties. The Japanese Shosoin collection has several examples of men's upper undergarments with short sleeves and overlapping collars that somewhat resemble a Bonbi. I concluded that the Bonbi's construction was closer in similarity to a ryu or shirt than these garments, since the ryu has a straight open collar, a slight curve at the underarm, and ties at the front as opposed to the side. I based my Bonbi pattern on my ryu pattern, which I designed for fabric 24 inches wide, which was the standard fabric width during the Tang Dynasty. The shirt is fairly straightforward, being very similar to a basic T-tunic without underarm gussets or gores. There are no extant shirts from the Tang Dynasty, so we are limited to period descriptions including reliefs, murals, paintings, and tomb figurines, though we can supplement this with extant garments from preceding and succeeding periods. In terms of construction, the shirt likely had a center back seam. The seam in the center back is described in the Book of Rites regarding the proper construction of the Shen Yi, and can be seen in upper body extant garments. Given that the standard width of fabric in the Tang Dynasty was approximately 24 inches, a center back seam is necessary to produce an open front garment that can go all the way around the body. The Shosoin Repository's Hanpi collection features several that have a visible center back seam, and the China National Silk Museum has garments from the Southern Song and Yuan dynasties with this same construction. The fabric I used for this project is a reproduction of a warp-patterned plain-woven nishiki or jin silk, originally found in the Horyuji Buddhist temple and now part of the Tokyo National Museum's collection, which dates from the late 7th or early 8th century. Nishiki fabric is made of a multicolored patterned weave, which usually depicts florals, stripes, or hunting scenes, which we would classify as jin using the Chinese term for the compound weave polychrome silk fabrics that include a variety of weave structures, including both warp and weft face weaves. The extant fabric from the Horyuji is also referenced as shokokin, which is a type of fabric believed to have originated in the Shu district of China, which is now in the southern Sichuan province, though the fabric was not necessarily produced in China. The fabric features pearl-bordered roundels and arabesques on a red ground, with paired lions and paired phoenixes alternating within the roundels, and paired deer and paired horses alternating between the roundels. In the images, the weft runs horizontally, meaning that when the textile was woven, the pattern was on its side. The reproduction fabric's pattern is also oriented this way. The phoenix is a typical Chinese motif, and the pearl-bordered roundel is derived from Persian motifs, so it is possible that this textile was woven in China and brought to Japan. There is no metadata accompanying the description of the Horyuji silk that refers to size from which a pattern scale can be derived, but there is a Buddhist ritual banner also found in the Horyuji temple that uses the same or a similar pattern, which measures 15 centimeters wide, but includes a border fabric. By measuring the pixels in the scanned image of the banner, 1,100 pixels from banner edge to edge, and using proportion math, I estimate that the roundel section of the banner is approximately 7.09 centimeters, 520 pixels wide. This is roughly 73 pixels per centimeter. Using this ratio, the diameter of each roundel, 760 pixels, is estimated at 10 centimeters. Based on these calculations, the reproduction fabric is at a smaller scale, approximately 57%, than the extant fabric, with each roundel approximately 4 centimeters wide. This would suggest that the original fabric was of a scale more in line with the bombi depicted in tomb figurines and mural paintings. This is an image of the reproduction silk at 20 times magnification, showing the warp-patterned plain weave structure. The warp threads still attached to this fabric support that this is a warp-patterned textile, as they are in multiple colors, leaving the red weft thread to produce the red ground. The primary tools I used to construct my bombi were scissors, a steel needle, glass-headed pins, and an iron for pressing. Secondary tools included a marking pencil, straight-edge ruler, and measuring tape. Scissors have been found in 213 Tang Dynasty-era tombs, made from materials such as gilded iron, silver, bronze, iron, and ceramic. These tools run the gamut from elaborate to simple, with the highest status individual being noblewoman Li Chui and the lowest a human sacrifice. Along with hairpins and mirrors, archaeologists often use scissors as an indicator that a tomb occupant was female. In the anonymous ballad Southeast Fly the Peacocks, we get a textual image of both scissors and a means of measuring. With her left hand, she grasped scissors and a measuring rod. With her right hand, she took the silk material. The ballad is based on events that happened at the end of the Han Dynasty, but may have been written as late as the mid-6th century. 78 examples of measuring rods, not unlike modern rulers, have been found in Han Dynasty tombs, made of materials such as bamboo, bone, bronze, gold inlaid iron, jade, ivory, and wood. Most of these rulers were decorated and had a hole at one end for tying a string. Flexible bamboo or string may have been used to measure curves in astronomical applications, and so may also have been used to measure curves for tailoring. Bone and ivory needles that are estimated to be between 300,000 and 23,000 years old were found in the Liaoning province. Steel needles traveled westward from China during the 1st century BCE, and needle rings, similar to thimbles, have been found in archaeological sites dating to the Han Dynasty. Small pins, likely used as tools in sewing, are mostly ignored by archaeologists in favor of larger and more elaborate pins, leaving the smaller, humbler pins to be lumped together and not given any context other than to associate a find with women, despite the fact that both men and women sewed clothing. There is ample evidence of prehistoric and Bronze Age pins used to fasten clothing, often with decorated heads. While I currently can't point to any physical or textual evidence of pins being used in China, the fact that steel needles existed and garments were made from materials ranging from silk gauze to heavy brocades suggests that some method of holding fabric together so that it could be stitched was known. Additionally, wire was produced at least as far back as the spring and autumn period, as it was used as a material for decorative inlay and other metalwork. The Origin of All Things, written in about 1474, describes what would become the clothes iron as invented by Emperor Zhao of the Shang dynasty as a torture device. These irons were shallow pans attached to long handles with flat bottoms and held hot coals. More information about textiles, tools, and techniques can be found in the full documentation for this project. Because the bombi is a short-sleeved garment, I did not add additional material to extend the sleeve length. As it is, the sleeve cuff sits at my elbow, which corresponds with period artwork. I was particularly aiming for the look of the bombi shown in the Astana tomb painting of a dancer, though I could easily wear it tucked into my skirt instead for another look. The hem extends approximately 4.25 inches past my natural waist. This is my pattern/cutting layout for the roux. This is for half of the pattern pieces. It would be mirrored for patterned fabric to accommodate for directional designs. The only direction of the fabric I used was the top-bottom of the animals in the roundels, but because there's no shoulder seam, I knew the animals on the back of the garment would be upside down in relation to those on the front. After cutting my pattern pieces out of the 24-inch wide fabric, I used my blind hem stitch to finish the ends of the sleeves before attaching them to the shoulders with a back stitch. I finished all of my seams with the flat fell seam technique, pressing and trimming them to reduce bulk. Next, I stitched the center back with a back stitch, then did the same for the side seams. As I was sewing this bombie, I embarked on a weight loss regimen. After I'd done the sleeve edges, center, back, and side seams, the garment no longer fit me. I had to retroactively refit the garment by taking in the center, back, and side seams, which meant temporarily removing the collar and completely taking out the already finished center back seam. I removed approximately 4 inches from each side seam. I stitched the new seams before cutting away the extra fabric and finishing the seams. The collar consists of a single straight piece of fabric that is 3 inches wide. To attach the collar, I first stitched it using a back stitch to the outside of the bombie, then folded it over and pressed it, then pressed up the inner edge and stitched it to the inside of the garment using a blind hem stitch. I had initially gotten halfway through attaching the collar before I needed to make my weight loss adjustments, so I had to remove the stitches and reattach the collar once I had a better fit. Once the collar was attached, I took 2 pieces of gold silk, a heavier plain weave from my scrap bin, and hemmed the edges before tacking it down in a square on the inside of the collar where I wanted my bombie to tie. This construction was due to fabric limitations. My initial ties were not constructed in a manner that I could confidently stand behind. They were made using a heavier weight plain woven gold silk that was left over from an arnigan coat I made for a friend several years ago. The Honorable Lady Stella de Silvestri suggested I look at traditional Korean costume to get more insight on the way the ties are made and attached to collars. The Tang Dynasty roughly corresponds to the Unified Silla period in Korea, and the majority of the garments in this book are not from that era. That being said, the methods of how to make and attach silk ties are likely very similar to what was used in the 7th to 9th century, given the simplicity of ties as a closure method. I sourced 2 different fabrics as potential tie replacements. One is a gold taffeta, similar in weight to the initial tie fabric. The other is a dark purple satin, which was described as a lining fabric by the seller, but I hadn't expected a satin weave. I chose to use the purple silk because the color was a better complement to the bombie fabric. In order to ensure that the purple fabric was indeed silk, I did a burn test. Apart from the smell, which my husband said was somewhat chemically, it behaved as silk would. I measured out strips of dark purple silk that were 6 centimeters wide and 54 centimeters long. I wanted the ties to be 2 centimeters wide when finished and chose a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance for the inside of the ties. The gold ties felt a little too short, especially when compared to the bombie illustrated in the Astana painting, so I doubled the length of the first ties. I folded and pressed the strips, then stitched them with a back stitch with an approximately half centimeter seam allowance. Then I turned the ties and folded in the narrow side 0.5 centimeters and closed the tubes with a slip stitch. The finished ties are 2 centimeters wide and approximately 53 centimeters long. After constructing the ties, I restitched the inside of the collar band with a blind hem stitch, taking care to make my stitches small so they would not be very visible. Finally, I used a back stitch to attach the ties to the inside of the collar with a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, with the tie pointed toward the inside of the garment, folded them back, and top stitched them with a running stitch and another 0.5 centimeter seam allowance. Overall, I'm happy with the finished bombie. I am pleased with what I was able to accomplish here in my first completely hand-sewn garment. Putting more thought into the tie construction forced me to focus in on an often neglected aspect of costume, and I'm happy for that, even if my best resources, from a practical sense, were from elsewhere in East Asia and out of period. This is information that will better inform all of the upper garments I construct from this region, period, and culture. While I was initially worried about the weight and drape of the purple satin as compared to the similar taffeta, I was pleasantly surprised when the ties were able to hold their shape without any top stitching. They are also something I feel I can easily swap out if need be, given how they are attached to the jacket. I'm also much happier with the slip stitch method of finishing the inside of the collar. The stitches are practically invisible. I would still like to make another bombie with a lining, or even several in a variety of fabrics, to compare the drape of the different garments given the varieties of styles we see in artwork.